Welcome back, everybody, to Cinema Sit Down. I am your host, Josh Williams.
I'm with Isaiah.
I'm Leilani.
I'm Noah.
I'm Jordan.
Thank you, everyone, so much for watching us here today and joining us. We're here to give you our review of Spotlight, released in 2015. Before we get into our review, though, let's hit the intro. Welcome back, everybody. I am really excited to get into this film. Again, we're reviewing Spotlight, released in 2015. Kind of, I guess, continuing our trend of one-word titles, movie titles. We've done like 3 in a row now, I think. Mm-hmm. But this movie, again, was released in 2015. One note here is it won Best Picture at the 2016 Academy Awards and won Best Original Screenplay. And to help give you some, some look behind the curtain here as for the other nominees. It beat out Bridge of Spies, Mad Max Fury Road, The Revenant, The Martian, The Big Short, Room, and Brooklyn. Like, that was a pretty stacked year that year, and the fact that it won it makes a testament to its accolades and how good it was, at least in my opinion. But I want to hear from you guys. I've seen this movie, I don't know how many times. I love it, and I will get into my views, but I want to hear about you guys. Isaiah, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of the movie, I think, is very difficult to pull off well. I mean, obviously, it's just a very kind of slow burn where the thing that they're trying to get at is just information. So the entire time you're just kind of in the dark with the characters, and that has to be done incredibly well for it to be entertaining, and somehow they pulled that off. I absolutely loved it, and I think the characters were really interesting, even if they weren't super personal. You could still get their personalities just from the way the actors could kind of capture what they thought the characters would be.
I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that people would bring up is that they didn't feel like there was enough character development with the characters. Characters aren't the point. They're just a tool that you're using to help figure out this whole story, and you're on a journey with them as they're figuring it out. And the other thing I always like to think about now, as you're watching now 2023, this took place in 2001, the summer 2001, where internet was just starting to become a thing. You know, not like today where we can find anything on the internet now with social media and everything. Back then, there was just like MySpace, and that was it. You know, so it wasn't really a thing. But what about you, Leilani? What did you think?
Honestly, kind of similar to what Isaiah had. It had that really slow start, but even though it was slow, most movies that are slow don't really capture my attention, but this one actually did. And then the more that it developed in advance, there was some more that actually came to be as they were finding the information, which I thought was very interesting. Because in the end, they had made a huge impact, and they got all the calls from victims of everyone who was too scared to say anything. So even just that message and shining just this light on something that's pretty deep and normally pretty dark and most people don't see. Getting to that point throughout the movie I thought was actually really good, and just how they kind of made it was really good. Yeah,
because you can kind of see the opposite between this and Room. And by then, last week when we talked about Room, I love Room. I mean, it's a fantastic film. And the difference is this one is a very slow burn, where to me at the end, very first time I saw this was in theaters in 2016 or 2015 December. And I just sit there in shock. I sit there thinking for a while. It makes you it hits you at the end more, and towards the end and at the end. Whereas Room, it hits you right away, and then you deal with the other things afterwards. Kind of the reverse. What about you, Noah? Is this your first time seeing it too? I think it's everybody's first time, right? I'm assuming. Yeah. So Noah, what about you, man?
Definitely my first time. It's crazy because nowadays it's kind of common knowledge, Catholic priests are be up to shady business behind the scenes. So this kind of paints the picture as to how we got to that point. It's how did everyone start figuring out about this stuff? Is really these people who really fought to make this story. And the craziest part of this story is how many people was trying to get it to cover up. Oh, just leave the story alone, or oh, this is bigger than us, or oh, da, da, da. These people knew this stuff was going on, and they was really trying to sweep it under the rug and whatnot. So I thought, oh, that was crazy.
Yeah, and that part to me was very important for them to talk about and explore with this film, when you kind of learn about everything that transpired. Mm-hmm. The other thing I thought was really important, I think that everybody can agree to, is people who are so embedded in the Catholic Church or just embedded in faith regardless, like when the story finally broke, like I love that Sasha Pfeiffer, the other journalist, she showed it to her grandmother first, who goes to church 3 times a week, and all that stuff. It kind of like rocked her, like it just kind of, I couldn't believe this is actually.
She was speechless.
How big it was. But what about you, Jordan? What do you think overall of the film?
I really liked it. This was my first time watching it. I love watching movies that involve usually a group of people that at the beginning of it, they were kind of like, oh, it's just a story we did. It was there, we did it, whatever. And then somebody said, well, let's like dig deeper into it. And by the end, they're all like heartbroken and not traumatized, but very, very affected by what they found and all the stuff that was going on.
Yeah, I can really agree with that too. And one of the things that I thought was really well done, I kind of want to get to the kind of help segue into that, is trying to take so much information and condense it into like a 2-hour and so film. Like, how did you guys feel as far as, like, I'll kind of go back around, or anybody can jump in, as far as the pacing was, as far as on a filmmaking level, we'll get to the specifics of like the church and everything like that afterwards, and we can talk about that in a bit, but as far as the filmmaking aspect, because we're all aspiring filmmakers here, and possibly journalists, how important is it for you guys, like, to watch this on a journalistic level, but also as a filmmaker, when you're looking behind the scenes, like the pacing, the camera movements, everything like that, the direction, how did you guys feel that was?
I think it was pretty good.
I think it was pretty good?
For as for the cinematography, I'll talk about that first, just because for me it just felt very clean and safe the way they did that. But for the pacing itself, I think they did a really good job of just showing the importance of the things that they're finding, because without necessarily constantly doing it in a way where it's just overly explaining, and you're kind of you're trying to figure things out naturally throughout the movie. And I think obviously this is a very important thing that they're trying to discover, but the little things that lead up to it, like getting the papers, to become public, that was a big thing of the movie. And I feel like they set that up very well. You feel the pressure of Mike, I think his name was, trying to get to the paper, showing how important this is. And so when he finally gets it and they read it, it's really a payoff. And I think they pace it out really well throughout the movie. I think it was very well done.
Yeah. What about you, Leilani?
Well, especially the fact that they were able to squish everything into the 2 hours, because all of this, throughout all of it, was done over like what, weeks, months? It ended up being like many months.
It started in July of 2001, and then by the time they actually printed it was January of 2022. So yeah.
Yeah, so wait, 2022?
Sorry. So 2002. There we go. Okay. That's better.
Yeah, like,
Good job.
Even
Thank
thinking
you.
about that, like that's so many months shoved into 2 hours. So even the pacing, like it was pretty steady. Like they didn't just like completely like skip over things. They had it like, so like there was a slow build into something happened, and then it like kept going kind of thing. So it wasn't like, oh, this, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're done.
Right.
So I think that they still did a pretty good job with like the pacing of it and kept it steady and just kept the whole story pretty streamlined.
What about you, Jordan? On a more filmmaking level or even journalistic, what was your take on some of those things?
I really enjoyed the pacing of it. Like Leilani said, it did start off kind of slow and then built up into it, but that's almost feels like that's how writing a story actually is. I mean, we've all had times where we've had a story and then, oh, I'm gonna do this, and it just takes almost forever, it feels like, to start it. But then you get one place and you're like, oh, well, now I can go here, and then by the end you're like, this is almost way too much to handle, because there's so much to do. And I thought they did a really good job of starting off really slow, and then by the end you're just like, geez.
Yeah, and that's not only the pacing for me, but it's the direction of it, having what to tell and how to tell it. Like, none of it seemed too like one of the things I liked personally was the acting wasn't too over the top. I think the only time you really see something over the top was Mark Ruffalo's kind of speech he did, which that's the only thing I'll giggle about. Is like, you guys ever see those little clips for like best actor, best supporting actor, where they always pick a certain clip? I remember the first time I saw him, like, that's everything I put for his nomination, I guarantee it. And of course they did. But let's circle back around to what we wanted to talk about before, which is this revelation of the Catholic Church and like the systemic, I guess we don't know if we can probably use the terms, but CA, I guess you want to call it like that, with children. how did that make you feel like towards the end when you were like when it started off small with just one when they investigated just one priest, and then it evolved into something much more massive on a scale that no one could have realized. Because the reason I was thinking about it was it rocks you of your faith in that institution of religion, but it also made me think about like it can really happen to anything if you firmly believe in any kind of organization or any kind of anything for that matter, and like you're so embedded into it, and to have this realization that it's not as squeaky clean and as good as you had thought, like how did like have you guys ever seen something like that or it felt like something like that before that hit you kind of for you? Because for me as a Christian, the reason I am a Christian but I don't go to church, it wasn't because of this movie, but it almost reinforced that Catholic Church is an institution. Like the actor in there who was the specialist talked about, like he still studies it, but he doesn't go to church because he's very shaken by the institution of it. That's how I am. But what about you guys? Is there any what did you guys feel when it comes to what kind of theme without the film?
I thought the way they introduce it is with the one bad apple, which kind of comes up again and again, and you kind of face that in any theories, I guess, about systemic corruption and stuff like that. Is it's one bad apple, and that's what it starts with. The one priest, and they repeat that the one priest. That's what it started with, and then it grows, and it grows, and they're constantly told, it's not going to get bigger than this. This is a small thing, isolated event, and it keeps going until the very end of the movie, where it finally just shows the states going and going, and then the countries going and going, and it just shows how big of a systematic kind of thing this is. And they started talking about the law is also involved, and I just think it did a really good job of slowly expanding the premise of the one bad apple idea. And yeah.
Anybody else have any?
I think definitely so even like you said that you're a Christian but you don't go to church. I'm also Catholic but I haven't gone to church in a while. So kind of seeing this and like just everything that's happened, it definitely shows how something that you could even like firmly believe in, there's always like something, there could always be something shitty happening, and the more that you believe in something, the more blind you are to if something negative were to happen.
Yeah.
So like you see all the benefits of it and everything, because that's kind of also partially what you want to believe. So whenever there's something wrong, you don't always want to see that those are happening. And to have all of what has happened, because like it started from one person and went to so many people, and they had like almost 90 priests that they were going after. Like that's
insane.
I mean, in comparison to all the amount that there are in the U.S. and the world, it's not a whole lot, but they add up.
Well, he said so in the film he talked about 6% of all priests, but like in Boston that was just 90 within Boston. Like when you think about a global scale, 6% of all priests in the entire world, that's insane.
Yeah.
If you think about it. But yeah, it's a good point. And that was one of the things I think the film did well. I don't know if you guys, I'll ask back to you guys too. Do you have any kind of feelings on that matter as far as like the theme of that itself?
Kind of like what y'all was saying. I mean, shoot. Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head already.
What about you, Jordan? Anything that stood out to you in those themes?
I think something that kind of stood out to me, and I can't fully remember everybody's name, but Rachel McAdams' character was talking to a guy that said, well, I used to go to church, but I don't feel comfortable there anymore. And I think with all this stuff that they were uncovering, it's disgusting almost to realize that if you do go to church, a lot of people go to find peace and find comfort and to feel like they belong, and now they can't go because they're like, well, last time I went, I didn't feel like I even mattered.
Right.
And that's extremely heartbreaking to realize that does actually happen.
And even then, like, yeah, I completely agree with, because when you look at some of the shots that they took, like when they were talking to, when Rachel McAdams' character was talking to the victim who was gay.
Yes.
And he would talk about how, how all this stuff happened to him, and he goes, well, there's a playground with a church next to it. And to me, like, they did that a lot. I don't know if you noticed that, but sometimes they would have shots where like they would try and talk to victims, and you would see churches in the background. To me, that was more like a symbolic it's almost like no matter how much these people can run from being these victims, the church is always there. And even like the end where I don't know if you guys, one of the things I picked up on was like there's like this beautiful little choir of kids singing Christmas in Catholic church, but then you have that in the back of your mind that it could be any one of those kids, and it's really haunting for me personally. But let's kind of, I guess we can kind of wrap up our thoughts here and kind of give your overall thoughts on anything else you want to kind of talk about, and I'll bring up one last point here to help kind of give some clarification, because as far as the CA within the Catholic Church. But let's start with you, Isaiah. Give us your overall thoughts, and then anything you want to add, and then your score out of 10.
I'll start with my score and just kind of explain it, I guess. I'm going to say this is probably like a 9 out of 10 for me.
Okay.
And it's just, I think it really explains the environment in which this can take place really well, while also having a really personal and interesting way of presenting it. And I strongly believe it deserves that 9 out of 10. There might have been a few things I would have added on, but then again, it would have really padded the length time.
What would you have added? I'm just curious.
I think they could have really delved deeper into having a character who was religious and have them battle with that a little bit more.
Okay.
Since all the main characters were not really that deeply religious, I think that was kind of a failed opportunity for a really interesting character, but it seemed like the director maybe didn't want to pursue really deeply into the characters. So
when you and sometimes I'd hear you and Noah talking when we were like kind of chatting about a couple things. So Ben Bradley Jr., the guy who was in charge of Michael Keaton, the Spotlight, the guy who was like, I remember some people, like, we were all screening it, some people like, oh, he's on a, if surprising enough, like, some people don't realize he is one of those characters, because this guy who probably goes to church all the time, and he's giving resistance to the idea that there is so many priests out there abusing kids, that probably because he goes to church that much. You know what I mean? So I guess they probably could have done a better job of elaborating for him, because it did sometimes look like he was in on it, like he was one of the people trying to cover it up, but in reality it was just somebody who was, just didn't want to believe it. You know what I mean? And he was pushing against it almost. But Leilani?
I was thinking between like 8 and 9, so probably like 8.5.
Okay.
Because I did really enjoy it. The production was great. The message that it had was great. Just the fact of overall what it symbolizes and everything that it's trying to share. I think I agree with like the character development, that it kind of needed a little bit more of that. The pacing still wasn't bad, but I feel like if it had a little bit more, it might have been a little more enjoyable, better. I don't know what to call it. It was really good overall, though. So.
Right. Noah?
I think it was pretty good overall. I don't think there's anything specific I would add. Maybe more like the after effects of it, because like they finally got it published at like the end, and we got to see the phone calls, and then we got the text at the end. You know what I'm saying, explaining some of the stuff that happened afterwards. I guess I would have kind of liked to like revisit it, like how some of the victims might have reacted to it, or like, see more like Barron's reaction, or even some of the people from the church, like how they would try to like resist it or fight against it. I would like to see a more of the aftermath of after the publishing. I think that would help a little bit.
Right. Okay. Jordan?
I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I
Okay.
really liked it. I agree
8
with
out of
what
10.
you guys were saying about having a character that was more religious to be more impacted. Probably would have made it more impactful. And something that you mentioned was when we had the choir that was singing, you're like, oh, it could have been any one of them. I felt like as they got deeper into the story, they would focus on just kids walking by or kids in a room, and they'd be like, oh, well, we don't know what's going on with
Right.
them.
Yeah, I'm giving this a 10 out of 10 still this day. I've seen this movie I don't know how many times. I feel it's, in my opinion, perfectly paced. The story is incredible. One last thing I want to add, we're going to wrap this up here. September of 2022, Pope Francis declared a zero tolerance law, whereas if a priest moving forward gets convicted or even gets anything as far as being a CA person, will get immediately ousted from the church. So I think that's really incredible to think about. And it took so long; it took forever. It's like 20 years from when the story broke, but it's an important step moving forward. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. Sorry we went on a little bit longer than anticipated, but we hope you go and check this movie out. And if so, let us know what you think about it. Until next time, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.